The story begins in a bleak, run-down neighborhood where broken windows and crumbling buildings paint a picture of hopelessness. The air is heavy with the acrid smell of decay, and the streets are cluttered with litter, amplifying the sense of abandonment. People move hurriedly, their faces worn with exhaustion, their shoulders sagging under the weight of an unforgiving existence. Life here is a constant struggle, where even the most basic needs feel like distant dreams. At the heart of this desolation is Devon, a 12-year-old boy who, despite his youth, has already faced more pain than many will in a lifetime. His clothes are ragged, his shoes barely held together by duct tape, but his spirit is unyielding. Devon is known for his kindness, often helping elderly neighbors with small chores or offering a word of comfort to those weighed down by their own burdens. Today, like so many others, he's scouring dumpsters behind a dilapidated convenience store, hoping to find something valuable enough to sell so he can buy medicine for his sick grandmother. She's been bedridden for months, and the sight of her suffering is a constant ache in his heart. Though Devon carries the heavy responsibility of caring for her, he never complains. In this world, survival means putting others before yourself, and Devon has learned that lesson all too well. As Devon sifts through the refuse, hoping to find something that will ease his grandmother's pain, a soft sound stops him. At first, it's so faint he thinks it's just the wind, but then he hears it again, a low, pained groan. His heart quickens. Devon freezes, his eyes scanning the pile of discarded items, sensing something amiss. He pushes aside old newspapers and broken boxes, his pulse racing as he uncovers the source of the noise. A woman, barely conscious, her clothes torn and stained with dirt. For a moment, Devon hesitates, unsure of how to react, but then he sees it. The woman's dignity, her foreign features, the elegance in her face despite her circumstances. She doesn't belong here. Her clothes are a stark contrast to the surroundings. Elegant but now in tatters, a stark reminder of how far she has fallen. Her face, pale and sweaty, holds an air of nobility that feels out of place in the grim alley. Her body is curled in pain, and it's clear she's in desperate need of help. Devon's breath catches in his throat as he stares at her, unsure of what to do. He's just a kid. How can he help someone so lost, so out of place in this unforgiving world? Then her groan cuts through the silence again, and she instinctively clutches her swollen belly. Devon's heart drops. It's clear she's pregnant and suffering. Without thinking, he drops his half-filled bag of recyclables and rushes to her side, trembling as he gently helps her sit up. His voice is shaky but filled with genuine concern. "Are you okay?" he asks softly, offering her a bottle of water. "You need help." The woman's eyes flutter open, her voice weak and strained. I can't," she whispers, clearly in more pain than just exhaustion. The desperation in her voice hits Devon like a punch to the gut. He knows he can't leave her here like this, not when she's so vulnerable. "I'll get help," he says urgently, but the woman grabs his hand, her grip cold and frail. "Please," she whispers, "don't call the police. They'll make things worse." Devon's confusion grows, but the fear in her eyes leaves no room for hesitation. She needs help, and she needs it now. Devon swallows his own fear and lifts her gently, steadying her as she stumbles. He knows he can't leave her alone in the alley. He can't walk away from someone who so clearly needs him. They move slowly through the streets, the weight of the situation pressing down on Devon's young shoulders. He's scared, but he keeps his focus on one thing: getting her to safety. The neighborhood is dangerous, filled with the sounds of shouting and the screeching tires of cars tearing through the streets. The air is thick with tension. Devon knows the street gangs rule these parts, and someone like Isabella, so out of place, so vulnerable, would be easy prey. He instinctively keeps his head down, constantly scanning his surroundings, aware of the risk with every step. As they walk, Devon wraps an arm around her to steady her, his other hand holding hers with surprising gentleness. Her breathing is shallow, her eyes distant and clouded. The uncertainty and fear swirl inside Devon, but there's only one thing he knows for sure. He won't abandon her, no matter what. As they move through the dim streets, Devon couldn't help but notice how Isabella's eyes flicked around them, alert to every shadow, every sound. She was acutely aware of the danger around them, but there was something in the way she carried herself, something almost resigned, as though she had endured horrors far beyond what this alley could offer. Devon's unease deepened, but he kept pushing forward, knowing he couldn't stop now. When they reached the corner of a street notorious for gang activity, a cold shiver ran down Devon's spine. A group of older boys stood in the shadows, their eyes narrowing as they watched him and Isabella with suspicion. Devon's heart pounded as he quickened his pace, his breath shallow. Just as he thought they might be noticed, a car sped by, momentarily distracting the group. Seizing the chance, Devon pulled Isabella down a narrow side street, praying they'd make it to safety without incident. Finally, they arrived at his apartment complex, a small, run-down building wedged between two towering, imposing structures. Devon felt a momentary relief wash over him as they stepped inside. The hallway was cramped and smelled faintly of mildew and stale cleaning products. Devon led Isabella to his door, quickly unlocking it and ushering her inside. The apartment was small, modest, with faded furniture and peeling wallpaper. His grandmother Eliza sat in a chair by the window, knitting softly, humming a quiet tune. She looked up as they entered, her brow furrowing in curiosity at the sight of Isabella leaning heavily on Devon. "Grandma, this is Isabella," Devon said softly, his voice trembling with emotion. "She needs help." Without a word, Eliza sprang into action, her eyes assessing Isabella's condition with practiced urgency. She rushed to help them both, guiding Isabella to the couch. "I was a midwife once," Eliza said, her voice steady. "Let me see what I can do." With hands that moved swiftly and confidently, Eliza began to care for Isabella, checking her pulse, feeling for signs of fever, and assessing her injuries. She used what little they had, bandages, old medical supplies, and an unwavering calm that seemed to comfort Isabella despite her distress. Devon stood nearby, his eyes wide with concern, the weight of the situation pressing on him. But for the first time that day, he allowed himself a small moment of hope. Isabella was safe now. "I don't know what I would have done without you," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes welled with tears as she looked up at Eliza, overwhelmed with gratitude. Eliza smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Isabella's forehead. "You're safe now, dear," she said gently. "Rest. We'll take care of you." When Isabella finally regained consciousness, the first thing she noticed was the comforting scent of herbal tea and the soft weight of a blanket draped over her. Devon was sitting nearby, his gaze fixed on the floor, his presence quiet but constant. As Isabella stirred, blinking her eyes open, her heart twisted at the sight of him. A sob escaped her lips, the emotions from the horrors she had endured crashing into her all at once. The warmth of the room felt like a stark contrast to the cold terror that had consumed her only hours before. Where am I?" Isabella's voice was raspy, hoarse from the trauma and dehydration she had endured during her captivity. Devon gently answered, his tone calm and reassuring. "This is my place," he said softly. "My grandma Eliza helped you. You were really hurt." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes as the reality of her ordeal set in. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself, and began to speak, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. "I was kidnapped," she started, her eyes distant as the pain of the memory flooded back. "They took me to pressure my husband, Daniel Monroe. They wanted money, so much money. And when he couldn't pay them, they left me to die." Devon's stomach twisted in horror at her words. He could hardly comprehend the cruelty she had endured. No one should be treated like that. The thought of someone being discarded so callously made his heart ache with sadness and anger. He swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. "That's horrible," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella's eyes filled with gratitude as she looked at him, her gaze searching his face, overwhelmed by the kindness he had shown her. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with raw emotion. You saved me. I don't even know why you helped me. You have nothing, and yet you risked everything." Devon shrugged, his expression humble but sincere. "I couldn't leave you," he said simply, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "You needed help." "It's just what I do," Devon said quietly, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable sincerity. "My mama always said if you have the chance to help someone, you should take it." Isabella's eyes softened, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and disbelief. Here was a boy, someone who had so little, who faced hardship every single day, and yet he had risked everything to save her. A stranger. His kindness was almost more than she could bear. She had been surrounded by wealth, privilege, and power, but none of it had ever taught her the kind of selflessness Devon had shown. She felt small in comparison, her heart heavy with gratitude. "You're a better person than anyone I've ever known," Isabella whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved me, and I don't know how to repay you." Devon's response was gentle, his smile as soft as his words, innocent yet full of heart. "You don't have to repay me. Just be okay. That's enough for me." Isabella's heart swelled with a mixture of sorrow and admiration. In the darkest moment of her life, it was a boy from a broken, impoverished neighborhood who had given her the greatest gift she could ever imagine, the chance to survive, to heal, and to know that goodness still existed in the world, even when it felt like everything else was falling apart. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Daniel Monroe, Isabella's billionaire husband, was consumed by the unbearable ache of her disappearance. For days he had searched tirelessly, working with the police, following every lead, desperate for any scrap of information. But the more time that passed, the more his fear grew. He couldn't imagine a world without her. She was his everything. As the days dragged on, the thought of losing her seemed more and more inevitable. Then one day a call came. A woman matching Isabella's description had been seen wandering in the slums, far from the lavish life she was used to. The news was almost too shocking to process. How could Isabella, a woman who had lived in wealth and privilege, end up in such a place? The police began following the lead, but Daniel, unable to wait any longer, decided to take matters into his own hands. He was used to controlling everything in his life, but now, in the face of this terrifying uncertainty, he had to rely on the hope of finding her. Back in the small apartment, Isabella was still recovering, her body growing stronger each day under Devon's care. Though she spoke little about her husband and kept her fears and feelings close, it was clear she was slowly healing. Devon, too, was conflicted. He had grown close to Isabella, and he knew that her place wasn't in hiding. But the risks of helping her reunite with Daniel weighed heavily on him. His neighborhood was a dangerous place, and he feared the influence of the Monroe family could bring nothing but trouble. But as he looked at Isabella, so vulnerable, so grateful, his decision became clear. She didn't deserve to live in fear. She deserved to be with the people who loved her, and he couldn't let fear stop him from doing the right thing. Taking a deep breath, Devon turned to Isabella. "I'm going to help you," he said, his voice filled with determination. Isabella, who had been gazing out the window, turned toward him, her eyes filled with both relief and apprehension. "Are you sure? The police might come. Daniel, he'll be so angry." Devon nodded firmly, his heart pounding. "I can't let you stay here, hiding forever. You deserve to be with your husband. I'll make sure you're safe." With that, Devon's decision was made. He didn't know how dangerous this journey would be, but he knew it was the right thing to do. He grabbed his coat, turned to Isabella, and said, "Let's go." As Devon prepared to leave, he knew that the timing was everything. Isabella was still fragile, but she needed to go back to the life she had known. With a quick call to the authorities, Devon learned that Daniel Monroe was on his way. The police would help bridge the gap between him and his wife. But as the sirens drew nearer, Devon felt a wave of anxiety rush over him. What would happen when Daniel saw Isabella? How would they react to everything that had transpired? When Daniel finally arrived at the apartment, his face weary and broken from days of searching, his eyes locked with Isabella's. Time seemed to stop as he rushed to her side, his face crumpling in relief. "Isabella, you're alive." Daniel's voice cracked as he embraced her, tears streaming down his face, unable to let her go. Isabella, her emotions pouring out, clung to him just as tightly. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered, her voice trembling. Watching them, Devon felt a mixture of pride and humility. He had helped reunite them, but it was their love, something far more powerful that had made the moment unforgettable. Turning to Devon, Daniel's face softened with gratitude. "I can never repay you for what you've done," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my wife's life, and I will make sure you and your family are taken care of. Whatever you need, it's yours." Devon nodded, his heart swelling with appreciation, but he simply replied, "I'm just glad I could help." The next day, as Devon sat with his grandmother, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, there was a knock at the door. Devon's heart skipped a beat as he opened it to find Daniel Monroe, this time accompanied by a team of lawyers. Daniel, though exhausted, smiled warmly at him. "What you did for Isabella, and for me, was beyond anything I could have imagined," he said. "You saved her life, and that's something I'll never forget." Devon felt a rush of emotions, unsure of what was coming. "Please, come in," he said, stepping aside. The lawyers entered, and one of them handed Devon an envelope. Devon opened it, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the check for $1 million inside. "This is a token of my gratitude," Daniel said. "I'm also offering to fund your education. You have the potential to do something incredible, and I want to help you get there. I'm also arranging for your family to move into a new home, one that's safe and comfortable." Devon could hardly believe what was happening. The weight of the gift overwhelmed him, but he felt humbled. He hadn't expected anything in return for his kindness. But this generosity, it was more than he could ever have imagined. "Thank you," Devon whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you, but I'll make sure to do my best." Devon and his grandmother stood in front of their new home, their eyes wide with disbelief. It was a modest house, yet to them, it felt like a dream, a safe, peaceful place to call their own. The quiet neighborhood was a far cry from the cramped, dangerous conditions they had just left behind. The move had seemed impossible just weeks ago, but Daniel Monroe's generosity had turned their world upside down, giving them a fresh start. For the first time in years, Devon felt something he had never truly known: stability. This house wasn't just a roof over their heads, it was a foundation for a new beginning. As he stepped inside, the spacious rooms stretched out before him, each one filled with possibilities. The kitchen was clean and bright, a perfect space for his grandmother to cook without worry. The backyard was large enough for his younger sister to run and play without fear, a rare luxury they had never experienced. The weight of it all almost overwhelmed him. But beneath that sense of relief, Devon felt a deep responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. This wasn't just a new home. It was a chance to become someone better, someone who could give back to the world, just as Daniel had given to him. He had the opportunity to build a brighter future, and he was determined to seize it. In the weeks that followed, Devon enrolled in school. His heart was set on becoming a doctor. He knew he wanted to help others, to make sure that no one ever had to endure the pain and hardship that his grandmother had lived through. The promise of an education, a path that Daniel had opened for him, was no longer just an opportunity. It had become the bridge to his dreams. One evening, after finishing his homework, Devon sat by the window of his new room, gazing out at the peaceful neighborhood. As the sun set and painted the sky in warm colors, his mind wandered back to the night he had found Isabella. The fear, the uncertainty, the choice to help her despite the risks. That decision, simple yet profound, had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. A smile tugged at Devon's lips and his heart swelled with gratitude. He had always believed that one act of kindness could ripple out and touch the lives of others, even in ways we may never fully understand. Now, standing on the edge of his future, he knew it was his turn to make a difference. He promised himself that one day he would return the favor to the world that had given him so much. For now, though, as he looked out at his new life, he felt a quiet sense of peace. He was finally free to live the life he had always dreamed of, a life filled with hope, opportunity, and the chance to give back.